For today's lesson, we'll review our exponential rules of product, quotient, power, negative exponents, zero power, a power of 1, when we have 1 to a power, and when we have a fraction in the exponent. Looking at the product rule, we have a to the power of n times a to the power of m, which equals a to the power of n plus m. And so we'll look at a to the power of 3 times a to the power of 4, which by the rule would give us a to the power of 3 plus 4, which is 7. And we can look at why this is, how we can think of it. We have a cubed times a to the 4th. And so I expanded a cube right here in these first parentheses and a to the 4th in the second parentheses. We could then write it as a times a times a times a times a times a times a, which would be a times itself 7 times, which is a to the 7th power. The quotient rule is a similar one. We have a to the power of n over a to the power of m, which will give us a to the power of n minus m. We'll look at a to the 5th over a cubed. By the rule, we'll get a to the 5th minus a cubed, which is a squared. And I'll write that out for us. So we get a to the 5th minus cube, which is a squared. And that will give me a squared. And how this would work is we would have a to the 5th on top, a cube on the bottom. And we know a divided by a is 1, so we cancel all of these out. I'm getting a times a, which is a squared. The next rule we'll look at is the power rule, which is a to the power of n times the power of m, which equals a to the power of n times m. And I will remind you that a is just a variable representing some number, so is n and m. They can be any number in our real set. Normally when we think of powers, we'll use integers or whole numbers, but they can be any number in the real one. So let's look at a to the power of 3 to the power of 4, which is a to the power of 3 times 4, which is a to the power of 12. And how does this work? We can think of a to the power of 3 to the power of 4 as a cubed times a cubed times a cubed times a cubed, which by the product rule is a to the power of 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, or 3 times 4, which equals 12. The zero power rule, it says that a to the power of 0 equals 1. So we can look at 10,252,350 to the power of 0, and by no surprise, that equals 1. And this is true for any number. I just picked a large number to show you. Now how? This is one of those examples that knowing the rule is easier than understanding it. But to get a to the 0 power, we can take a to the power of n divided by a to the power of n. So this is just two numbers that will be the same on top and bottom, and we'll know that a number divided by itself will be 1. And by the quotient rule, we get a to the power of n minus n, which equals a to the power of 0. Our negative exponent rule is a to the power of negative 1 equals 1 over a. And again, we can look at 5 to the power of negative 1, which is 1/5. Remember, it's 5 we could write it as 5 over 1, so you can think of it as just writing the reciprocal. And how do we get this? Well, if we have 1 over a 1 divided by a1, then we can apply the 0 rule to get a to the 0 over a to the 1. And remember that anything to the 0 power equals 1. So these two are the 1 over a to the 1 power equals a to the 0 over a1. Then we will have the quotient rule giving us a to the 0 minus 1, which equals a to the negative 1. Now that we reviewed our exponent rules, we can now look at what happens if we have a fraction. And so we have a to the power of n over m, which equals root m times, god damn it, which equals root m of a times n. Okay, and we can also write root m a times to the power of n. Either one of these will work. and we'll look at our different examples. We have 16 to the power 1/2, which would be the same as root 16. And so we can write root 2 to the 16 to the first half. And normally when we have root 2, we'll just write the square root of 16, and 16 to the 1 power, as we saw, was 16. So that will give me 4. And we can also look at 9 to the power of 3/2, which will be the root 2 9 cubed. And looking at that off the top of my head, I don't know what 9 cubed is, but I can rewrite it as root of 9 to the power of 3, and hopefully everyone knows the root of 9 is 3, so we get 3 to the power of 3, which is 27. So what that tells me is 9 to the power of 3/2 would equal whatever 27 squared is. And for the last one, we have 2 to the power of 4/2, which we could write, if you notice, is the same as 2 to the power of 2. So that would give me 4, or I could write it as root 2 to the power of 4, which would be root 16, which gives me 4. So again, different ways of writing it, and you can do it either way.